from Hollywood Monastery, Swami Medhananda, who will be talking to us on science of happiness, right?
The science of happiness,
The
yes.
science of happiness, which is a very important topic. And let me tell you just a little bit about him. He was initiated by Swami Swahanandaji in Hollywood, and then he went to India and was the first brahmachari to join at Vivekananda University at Belur Mutt. And he served there for about 11 years as in the philosophy department and head of the philosophy department, in fact. And he had his sannyasa in 2020 from our dear and just departed, revered Swami Smaranandaji Maharaj, the last president of the Ramakrishna order who just left his body. And after that, he was posted to Mysore, where he served for a year, and then he was, to our good fortune, was posted to Hollywood. And now I will ask him to give his talk.
Thank you so much. So is the mic position okay? Is this fine? So should I put it on the table? Will that help? And then bring it sort of down? You tell, whoever knows should, oh, I remember, this is the famous mic that doesn't balance. Okay. You do it. Okay. All right. And can somebody get me a glass of water? Someone in the audience? Ek gilas jol ache? Thank you. Is that fine? Om asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya Mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be back here in Houston. I was here last summer in the sultry, hot Texas, and I could, oh, it was giving me nightmares of India again. So I'm glad to be back in a much cooler part of the year. I'll be talking today about, I think, not just a very important topic, probably the most important topic one can talk about in spiritual life, the science of happiness. Thank you. We're living in strange times. Strange because, on the one hand, it seems to me that we're living in an age, an unprecedented age of instant gratification. Unprecedented. In the history of humanity, it has never been easier for us to get whatever we want, whenever we want, in whatever quantity we want, because of modern technologies, because of social media, because of the internet, and 100 other things. So to give you a few examples, back in the 90s, 80s and 90s when I was growing up, there was no internet, at least 80s and then early 90s at least. So if you wanted to meet a romantic partner, what would you have to do? You'd have to go to a singles night, bar, or if you're in India, of course, it'll be arranged. That's a separate issue. Now you've got Tinder, now you've got this, a million dating sites. There's so many ways that you can get exactly what you want, in whatever quantity you want, whenever you want. What about TV shows? When I was growing up, I loved TV growing up. You might be surprised, but I was a TV addict. Cartoons, you name it. And then, so when I got a little older, Seinfeld was my favorite show back in high school. But for the new, you have to wait a week. I think Thursdays, right, on NBC. And so I'd have to wait a whole week for the new episode to come out. Now what? Now you can binge watch. You can watch an entire season of a show in one sitting and feel disgusting afterward, but still you watched a whole season of Game of Thrones or whatever it is. It's incredible. Now the paradox. Now the paradox. We have never been more miserable in the history of humanity. This is the paradox. We are getting as much of whatever we want in whatever quantity we want, and yet we're not happy. This is strange. It's puzzling. How do you explain it? Well, first of all, we just went through a terrible pandemic. We're just kind of getting out of it now. There's a Mental Health America study published in 2023 called The State of Mental Health in America, just to give you a sense of how unhappy we are. 20.7 I won't give the exact. So more than 20% of adults experience mental illness between 2019 and 2020. That's equivalent to over 50 million Americans. Millions of adults in the US experience thoughts of suicide. Over 1 in 10 youth in the US are experiencing depression that is severely impairing their ability to function at school or work, home with social life. Terrible statistics. So this is what I would call the paradox of instant gratification. We should be happy, happier than ever before, and yet we're miserable. Why? In the West, I think that our most valuable resource for understanding this paradox and achieving genuine happiness is the nascent but burgeoning field of what's called positive psychology. Positive psychology, it's a nascent field, right? It was just started a few decades ago in the West. Arguably, the founder was Abraham Maslow, but more recently there's a contemporary psychologist named Martin Seligman who really helped to popularize positive psychology, and now it's all the rage and lots of people are in on it. They want a piece of the action. So it's a huge field, and I think it's extremely helpful in understanding not only why we're unhappy, but how we can really achieve genuine happiness in this life. And on the Indian side, I think Vedanta is our most valuable resource. So what I want to do today, time permitting, is bring some of the insights of Western positive psychology into dialogue with the great ancient spiritual insights of Vedanta, with the focus especially on Bhagavad Gita. And what do I mean by bringing into dialogue? More specifically, I think on the one hand, you'll find that Bhagavad Gita anticipated, in certain respects, some of the key insights of modern Western positive psychology. On the other hand, Western positive psychology, and especially these new, very sophisticated scientific studies, can help corroborate some of the teachings that we find in the Bhagavad Gita. And so they're kind of mutually illuminating and mutually supporting. But I want to add a third, more critical dimension as well, which is this, that I think that Western positive psychology stands to learn a great deal from Vedanta, that it's not complete in itself, and that there are certain things that we can learn, that positive psychologists can learn from Vedanta and from the Bhagavad Gita. So there are certain gaps, we can say, certain missing elements in the science of happiness in the West that I think Vedanta can help fill. So that's an ambitious undertaking, but I'll do my best. To give a kind of focus to the talk, I thought I'd focus on one particular book, a very important and influential book in positive psychology. There are many books I could have picked. One that I'm grateful to Vani for just referring me to just a couple days ago. It's called The Happiness Advantage. How do you pronounce the guy's last name? A-C-H-O-R, Achor? Achor, yeah. So I'll very briefly give a nod to that book as I was racing to read it before this talk. But the main focus is going to be a different book on happiness called Authentic Happiness by Martin Seligman. It was published in 2002. Seligman distinguishes 3 paradigms for living. Okay? Each one of these is a paradigm that's meant to make us happy. First paradigm is what he calls the pleasant life. Second paradigm is what he calls the good life. Third paradigm is what he calls the meaningful life. Okay? This is the way I'm going to structure the talk. Let's start with the pleasant life. What does he mean by the pleasant life? It's kind of obvious, but the pleasant life is a life based on pleasure. It's a hedonistic life. the primary aim of life is to maximize pleasures, and it's pleasures of a particular sort. The pleasures primarily of instant gratification, things that you get instantly. What Seligman says, and he doesn't just say it, it's not a dogmatic assertion, it's backed up by many studies. What he says is that living this kind of pleasant life is a recipe for unhappiness. You're going to fall flat on your face if you try to achieve happiness through the pleasant life. We can start with a famous experiment conducted at Stanford University in 1972. Many of you are already familiar with it, but I'll just mention it again. The famous marshmallow experiment. Walter Mischel, scientist, he brought a 4-year-old into a room, and he placed on this plate, instead of water, there's a delicious-looking marshmallow. And he says to this kid, you can eat this marshmallow now, or I'm going to leave the room for 15 minutes. And if you can hold out for 15 minutes, when I come back and I still see that marshmallow uneaten, I'm going to reward you with not 1, but 2 marshmallows. Your choice, no pressure. Leaves the room, videotaping the whole thing. And one after another, the kids come in, and it's hilarious to watch the videos. How some of the kids who really want 2 marshmallows, they're trying their best to kind of hold out, and they're kind of distracting themselves, twiddling their thumbs, looking up at the sky, scratching their head, doing all that. Anyway, what happens? What's the outcome? 1 out of 3 succeeded in holding out for those 15 minutes. They were rewarded with the 2 marshmallows. 2 out of 3, the majority, 66.6%, couldn't, got the 1 marshmallow. Now, that's not the end of the study. It's a longitudinal study, which means long-term. They tracked the lives of each one of these kids, these 4-year-olds, decades later. So in their maybe late teens and then early 20s, like that. Tracking various life outcomes on various measures. SAT scores, educational attainment, body mass index, how fat they are, mental health. On all measures, those 4-year-olds who were able to hold out for the second marshmallow had much better outcomes than the 2 out of 3 who succumbed before the 15 minutes was up. This is extremely important because it suggests that exactly what Seligman is proving with a whole arsenal of modern scientific research is that a life based on instant gratification is going to be a life primarily of unhappiness. Okay? So delayed gratification is key to genuine happiness. That's one part of this formula. That's one of the things that positive psychology is finding. And just think about it intuitively. Your own life. Ask yourself, what are the things that make me happy? In general, you're going to find that they're the things you had to work at. Things that weren't instantly attained. Things that you're proud of, like maintaining a wonderful relationship with your spouse for 50 years, raising your children well, having a meaningful job, for instance. These kinds. Running a marathon, that's no joke. I'm a runner, but I haven't tackled a marathon yet. I've only done the half marathon. Maybe I will. So, thing I wanted to mention. Another aspect of this, so positive psychology is interdisciplinary, and they also learn from the inside of neuroscience. There's another book I wanted to mention briefly, a much more recent book by Anna Levy called Dopamine Nation, published in 2001. She's a Stanford psychotherapist, and she talks about how, well, what is dopamine? Some of you know this, but I'll just say. People refer to it as the kind of feel-good chemical or the craving. It's a neurotransmitter that's responsible for allowing us to feel pleasure, satisfaction, motivation. So when you feel that you've achieved something, when you feel good about something, there's a surge of dopamine in the brain. That's a signal, and you can measure that with EEGs. Now, what happens? Instant gratification. Any form of instant gratification, whether it's social media, whether it's a delicious piece of cake, whether it's swiping left or right on Tinder or whatever it is, that leads to a spike in dopamine levels, a sudden spike in dopamine levels. We want that. That's what people crave. So we go for it. So we repeatedly indulge in the same thing. We repeat the same experience to get that same dopamine the first time. But what happens? the more we engage in that experience, the higher our for that experience becomes, and our threshold goes down, and our baseline dopamine levels start plunging. Which means what? Our baseline state is to be unhappy. This is the cycle of substance abuse. Now what's happening, though, is scientists now are distinguishing between two fundamentally different kinds of addiction, but which have exactly the same structure. Substance addictions are addictions to substances like heroin, cocaine, alcohol, and so on, cigarettes. Behavioral addiction. Almost all of us are addicts from the standpoint of behavioral addiction. We may not be drug addicts, we may not be addicted to cigarettes or alcohol, we might pride ourselves on that, but we might still be behavioral addicts. And it's hard to blame us in a way because of modern technology. Because these technologies are designed to make us addicted. Because you have these brilliant programmers on the other end, on the back end of Google and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, who are developing incredibly sophisticated algorithms for giving us exactly what we want, whenever we want, in as much quantity as we want. And we're like these guinea pigs, we're like rats. We click on one video, now I know what this guy likes. Let me give him 18 more of those. and make each next one more salacious than the previous one and more hardcore. And I'm stuck in this spiral of, it's very hard to get out at that point. You see? So the cycle of addiction is and this craving for dopamine is a major part of the reason why instant gratification, in the end, is a recipe for unhappiness. There's a Swiss scientist named Christian Lüscher who did experiments with mice, which are quite interesting. He in one side of the cage, he has a lever, which the mouse can push. Every time the mouse pushes the lever, it gets a direct dopamine hit. That's just the way that the lever is designed. Puts the mouse in the cage. Mouse, without knowing what that lever is, it goes up to the lever, hits it. It gets this incredible dopamine surge, and it's in love. It's addicted. What it'll do? Keeps hitting the lever. Christian Lüscher, the scientist, says, if after 2 hours we didn't take them out of the cage, they wouldn't eat, they wouldn't drink, then they would probably die quickly, but very happily. And it's true. Now, another variation on the same experiment. The same scientist. Same lever on one side of the cage. Before putting the mouse into it, he puts an electrically charged grid, separating the mouse from the lever. It's very painful for the mouse. Keep that in mind. Okay. Now, what happens? The mouse already is primed. It knows what it's going to get from that lever because it already pushed it to get the dopamine surge. It's going to sacrifice everything and endure that terrible pain crossing over the grid. Not just that. It's not like once it crosses the grid, it's safe and happy, and then it can hit the lever. While pushing the lever, it's still on the grid. So every time it pushes the lever, it's still getting the electrocution. And yet it can't stop. It reminds me of Sri Ramakrishna's, the story of the camel. The camel, for that tiny bit of juice, that little bit of water in the cactus, will endure no end of pain and get bloody gums in the end and make a big mess of its mouth just for that tiny. He says worldly people are like that. People who crave after instant gratification are like those poor camels, like these poor mice. Another interesting variant on the same experiment. The scientist replaces what's in the lever, not dopamine, but food, something that's indispensable for life. The mice don't dare to cross the grid. They'd rather die than cross the grid, and yet for dopamine, they're happy. They're willing to cross it. So you might be thinking, how is this relevant to us? Because we're the mice. We're all mice now. So now finally, where does Bhagavad Gita come in? Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18. There are 3 verses which are very, very profound. Verses 37 to 39. Which define 3 different kinds of happiness, sukham, based on the 3 gunas. In fact, last year when I came here, I talked about the 3 gunas, so you'll see this talk actually dovetails pretty nicely with that one. And you're all experts now in the gunas, so I can presuppose some background knowledge. Sattva, rajas, and tamas, right? Sattva makes us tranquil, calm, humble, selfless, compassionate, giving, devotional, spiritual, all the good things. Rajas makes us restless, hyperactive, full of desires, ambitions. We can have a nasty temper. Rajasic people tend to have nasty tempers. Tamas makes us lazy, lethargic, tend to put off things, be procrastinators, want to sleep a lot, not want to get out of bed, and so on. Okay, but let's start with how Gita, Bhagavan Krishna, defines Rajasika happiness. Okay? Vishayendriya sanyogad yattad agrem ritopamam pariname vishamiva tatsukham rajasam smritam. Rajasika happiness is happiness that derives from the contact of the sense organs, eyes, ears, with sense objects. In the beginning, Krishna says, sense pleasure is like nectar, amrita. In the end, it's like poison. In one verse, Bhagavan Krishna, thousands of years ago, explained the fundamental structure of all instant gratification. We want it. Why do we want it? Because of that nectar in the beginning. What we don't know, or what we only learn through terrible experiences and finally hitting rock bottom for many drug addicts, they only go to Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous after hitting what they call rock bottom, you see. What they don't realize is that in the end it's poison. This is what the Gita is saying. Why is it poison? Sri Aurobindo, in his commentary on the Gita, he explains it really nicely. He says, this Rajasika joy, he's explaining this verse, is nectar to the lips at first touch. But there is a secret poison in the bottom of the cup. And after that enjoyment, the bitterness of disappointment, satiety, fatigue, revolt, disgust, sin, suffering, loss, transience. And the last one, see, there are different things, in different forms of instant gratification. One of these kinds of poison might be more prominent than in the end. But what all of these forms of instant gratification have in common is that last thing that Sri Aurobindo says, transience, impermanence, anityam. It doesn't last. No matter how blissful it is, it doesn't last. We have to come down. And when we come down, we're going to come crashing down. Still, that's not a sufficient answer on its own. Why exactly are sense pleasures poison in the end? So let's go deeper. Another Vedantic scripture, the Bhagavata Purana, chapter 9. There's a very colorful story. The Puranas are full of these kinds of stories, full of like extraordinary timescales and all that. There's a king named Yayati. And he's a very, let's say, he has a very sense-oriented mind. And he's already got plenty of wives and concubines and all that, but he's not satisfied. And so he's trying to maximize his enjoyment and his pleasure, and he's doing as much as he can. Of course, he's extremely wealthy. He's a king. And still not satisfied. So he lines up his sons, maybe 3 sons, I don't remember. He says, which one of you is willing to exchange your body for mine? Because with your body, I can enjoy sense pleasures for many, many more years. And I'm an old man now. Who is loyal enough? Who loves me enough to do this? And finally, his youngest son, his most obedient, loving son, says, of course, Father, whatever you say, I'll do. They exchange bodies. Yayati continues with his son's body to enjoy for, I think, as I said, time scales, like thousands of years, going on and on and on, indulging in various forms of instant gratification. In the end, he feels exactly what Sri Aurobindo talks about, the satiety, the disgust, the sin, the suffering, the transience. He feels all that. And he becomes a sage. He becomes wise through these experiences. And he says something extremely profound. Na jatu kamaha kamanam upabhogena shamyati havisha krishnavatmeva bhuya eva vivaddate. Desire is never satisfied through enjoyment, through indulgence. Rather, imagine there's a fire, and you're trying to put the fire out. And you take oil and you add oil to it. What happens? Fire increases. Of course, the word in the Indian shloka is ghee, clarified butter. I'm giving you the Western equivalent of it. it gets even bigger. This is exactly what happens. The more you indulge, the more you try to satisfy your desires, the more intense, the stronger those. Bhagavan Krishna says the same thing in chapter 3. Arjuna asks the most poignant questions. We're all in Arjuna's position. Arjuna asks Krishna, Arjuna says, what is it in me? Even when I want to be good, I want to do the right thing. What is it that makes me commit sin and do the very thing that I don't want to do? Krishna's answer, Kama esha krodha esha rajoguna samudbhavaha mahashano mahapapma vidhyenam avairinam. Kama and krodha, desire for sense pleasures, and krodha, anger. Rajoguna samudbhava, this is very, very important, this phrase. Both of these, desire and anger, stem from rajoguna, from rajas. So keep that in mind. We're going to revisit the three gunas. Mahashano mahapapma vidhyenam eva. Know these two things to be your enemy. They are mahashano. This is it's a very evocative metaphor. It is all devouring. It is insatiable. It's the very nature of desire to be insatiable, never to be satisfied. You feed it, you keep feeding it, it'll just grow stronger and demand more and more. It's never satisfied. So it reminds me of another verse, another Vedantic scripture called Vairagya Shatakam, 100 verses on renunciation. Satu bhavati daridro yasya trishna vishala manasi cha paritushte kortavan ko daridraha. This verse gives beautiful new definitions of true wealth and true poverty. We think wealth means being like Elon Musk, having $1 billion more, many billions of dollars. Poverty means not having much money, not having many nice possessions. No. True wealth. Satu bhavati daridro. Let's start with the definition of poverty. Satu bhavati daridro. Yasya trishna vishala. The poor person is the one whose desires are great, whose desires are not satisfied. Elon Musk, one of the richest people in the world, can be poor by this definition. Seems to be probably. Manasi cha paritushte kortavan ko daridraha. When the mind is contented, who is rich and who is poor? That poor pauper in India or Africa or wherever, making pennies a day, but who is content with what he or she has. That person is far richer than the billionaire who is looking at his fellow billionaires' 7 yachts and envy and says, I only have 2. Just think about it. All right. I've spent most of the talk already just on the pleasant life. But now, we have to get to the 2 other kinds of life, right? This is all why, I'm explaining why, using the insights of positive psychology, neuroscience, and Vedanta, especially Bhagavad Gita, as to why a life based on maximizing pleasure and various forms of instant gratification is ultimately a recipe for unhappiness. I hope I've convinced you of that, but you can ask me questions and challenge me in the Q&A if you want. But let's move. Now, to how do we live life better so that we can actually live genuinely happy lives? Lives of contentment and fulfillment, spiritually oriented. Second paradigm that Seligman talks about, the good life. The good life. He says that the secret to what he calls authentic happiness is leading not the pleasant life, but the good life. And he says the good life consists in doing 2 things, 2 simple steps. First step, identify your signature strengths. Second step, find a vocation, a line of work, a calling that helps you to cultivate those signature strengths on a daily basis, on a regular basis. That's it. You say, wait, this doesn't sound that complicated. It's true, but it does require courage. It requires honesty with yourself. Why do I say courage? I'll tell you just from personal experience. I grew up in Boston and in a Bengali family, and Bengalis are famous for being obsessed with academics, as many of you Bengalis know. And so when I went to college, my dad forced me to be a computer science major because that's a respectable major. It's what good, smart Indian boys do. So I was a computer science major. I was pretty good at it, but unhappy. It wasn't what my heart wanted. So after a year, I mustered the courage to change my major to what? To English literature. Oh my goodness. This is the ultimate in shame for Indian parents. Because in India, in 10th grade, Madhyamik Parikha, this 10th grade exam, if you do really well, go into the science stream. If you do terribly, if you fail, arts. Arts is what we call in the West humanities. So the flunkies go into humanities. So I became a flunky. Okay. So I was an English major, philosophy minor, and I loved it. I fell in love. And there was no looking back after that. And my parents were furious. No, I don't want to say parents. My dad mainly. He was furious. And I stood my ground, and I'm so grateful that I did. Of course, I went through the same kind of thing when I told them I was going to be a monk. You can imagine. But I already went through it once, and so I was sort of primed, and they were primed, and it was fine. Okay. So anyway, now, Seligman. That's Seligman. On the Vedanta side, just see how brilliant this scripture is, Bhagavad Gita. Over 1,000 years ago, it says exactly the same thing. Bhagavan Krishna talks again and again in multiple chapters about what he calls swadharma, our own law of being. And, this is another, I have to go on a tangent. Hopefully I'll come back. Remind me if I was in Boston College a few months ago giving a talk at a graduate seminar. And in the afternoon, that same professor invited me to attend an undergraduate introductory course on Hinduism. She's a brilliant professor, and it was the first class, so the very first day of an intro to Hinduism, and I'm just sitting in, I'm just watching. And this brilliant lady, she has a PowerPoint, and right off the bat she says, Hinduism is based on the caste system. This is her introduction to a room full of impressionable undergraduates of all majors. This is not just religious studies majors, of all majors, telling them the essence of Hinduism is the caste system, and she does it in such a sly way. She's not actually directly criticizing the caste system, but of course, you say caste system, it's an evil. Everybody knows that. So indirectly, she's attacking Hinduism in an academic course at Boston College in one of the most respected universities in the country. And of course, I raise an objection, and I say this, I go to the Bhagavad Gita. I say, if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, you'll find that Bhagavan Krishna does not define caste in terms of heredity. The current caste system is a hereditary caste system and is the source of all of these evils that we see. You see, this is what Swami Vivekananda hated. But Swami Vivekananda brought our attention to the original caste system, which you find embodied in the Bhagavad Gita. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna defines caste, varna, in terms of two things, guna and karma. Guna means your innate tendencies, qualities, your temperament. Karma means your behavior, what you do. Nothing to do with heredity. You're not born into a caste. That's not the way that the caste system was conceived in the beginning. It degenerated into that, but that wasn't the original caste system. But the original Vedanta caste system dovetails beautifully with what positive psychologists are only discovering now. The secret to authentic happiness, the secret to leading the good life. What Krishna says is, identify your swadharma, and it defines the different swadharmas. You can find them in chapter 18. The swadharma of a brahmana is one who has many satvika qualities, right? Humble and scholarly and so on and so forth, devotional. The swadharma of a kshatriya, somebody who's very strong and powerful and will fight for justice and for the right cause and so on. So it goes like that. In the Shudras, it's not about good or bad. It's just about what are your innate tendencies. Shudra is people who have a service-oriented nature. Seva bhava in Sanskrit, Sheva bhava in Bangla. You'll find some people, innately, they just want to serve others. Is there anything wrong with it? No, it's a wonderful spiritual quality to have seva bhava. So it's not about a hierarchy of good and bad, the Brahmins are better. It's all nonsense. That all comes later. First step in leading the good life and in spiritual life is identify your swadharma. Which category do you belong to? Number two, second step, find a calling, a vocation that helps you to cultivate those signature strengths, those gunas and those karmas. That's how ancient Indian society, at least ideally, operated. We don't know to what extent it was implemented, but that was the ideal. Let's learn from the ideal. Do you see? So Krishna talks again and again about engaging in swabhava niyatam karma. Swabhava niyatam karma. find a vocation that best aligns with your swadharma, your swabhava, your own law of being. Why? Because number one, if you do that, we're full of energy. We have a tremendous amount of energy. The question is, how are we channeling that energy? And to what extent are we maximizing our use of this energy? By finding something that we're genuinely good at, right? We are using all of the resources of the human personality toward one end, which means that we're going to make maximal spiritual progress, and we're also going to be satisfied in our work. And at the same time, from the societal standpoint, the social standpoint, we're going to maximally benefit society. If society is structured in such a way that somebody whose qualities makes them will ensure that they'll be an excellent doctor, but society forces that person to be a lawyer, what's going to happen? Won't be a very good lawyer. But if somebody who's meant to be a lawyer is allowed to become a lawyer, is given the resources and the scope to become a lawyer, that society will flourish. Do you see? So both individually and socially, this is a recipe for happiness, for genuine happiness. Csikszentmihalyi, he's another famous positive psychologist who passed away, I think, fairly recently. He wrote a book called Flow, a very famous book. And he talks about how when you find an activity, a project, a calling that is challenging, it has to be challenging. If it's not challenging enough, what happens? You get bored. If it's too challenging, you get discouraged and frustrated. So the sweet spot is you find something that's sufficiently challenging, but also a challenge that you're up to. You can meet the challenge with your specific gunas and karmas, using the Vedantic terms. Do you see? You're up to the challenge. And when you can do that, you hit that sweet spot, you enter a flow state. And that's where the true happiness is. I'm sure many of you can just think back on your own lives when you really enter that state of flow. And you'll understand that it wasn't something that you get instantly. There's no form of instant gratification that lets you enter a flow state. There's always delayed gratification. There's always a challenge. There are obstacles, but you're up to the challenges, you're up to the obstacles, and then you enter that flow state. That's what the good life is about. But I want to mention, here's where I told you that there's a kind of critical dimension to my talk, and I wanted to get to that. What is positive psychology missing that it can learn? What can it learn from Vedanta? Seligman says that there are these two main steps, right? Identify your signature strengths. Number two, cultivate them. Find a line of work that helps you to cultivate those strengths. What it neglects and what Vedanta teaches is that that's not enough. Third step, convert your karma, whatever that karma is, into karma yoga. Whatever that work is that you're meant to do based on your guna and your karma, your swabhava, your swadharma, it's not enough to do it. Analyze the motive with which you're doing it. This is something that these positive psychologists, so far, I haven't seen them go into it. Certainly not in this book, On Authentic Happiness, and I haven't seen Seligman following up on this either. But it's extremely important in spiritual life and just for just general happiness. You're going to find that, just imagine, there's a surgeon, top class surgeon. And one of these surgeons is he has to do a very important surgery. But the motive is, I want to do this really well. Why? So that I get a raise, so that I get a promotion, so that my name is emblazoned on a newspaper. Imagine that the patient is some famous celebrity or something like that. Now what happens? Imagine that he succeeds. He succeeds, which means what? He's going to get the name and fame, he's going to get the promotion, the raise, everything. He'll bask in that happiness for some time. But what happens? That ambition's not satisfied. And in the next surgery, he's going to want more of that name and fame. He's never going to be satisfied. So ultimately, that surgeon's not going to be very happy. And he's not going to succeed in all his surgeries. You see, Sri Ramakrishna used to say, God laughs twice. One of the times God laughs is when a doctor says, I will save you. Who are we? Who are doctors to save anyone? It's God who saves. You see. Now, imagine a second surgeon. Equally qualified, equally capable, but the motive is completely different. He's doing the surgery as karma yoga. You see. What does that mean? It means he's going to do his best and he'll leave the rest. Do your best and leave the rest. This is a common expression in India. I'll do my best and I'll leave the rest. To whom or to what? To God. this is what the Gita teaches again and again. Mai sarvani karmani sanyasyadhyatma chetasa nirashi nirmamo bhutva yudhyasva vigata jvaraha. Whatever you do, do it as an offering to me, and then don't worry about it anymore. Do your best. Don't do it in a mediocre way. This is called spiritual bypassing. I don't really want to do something. I'm kind of lazy, or I'm not particularly interested in doing it, and so I'll say, oh, it's God's will that I do it, and that's an excuse for me not doing it well. Not that. You do it full of enthusiasm and perseverance. There's a phrase in the Gita, dhriti utsaha samanvitaha. This is how we should do karma yoga. Dhriti, you should be full of perseverance. Stick with it to the end. And utsaha, full of enthusiasm. This is related to this happiness advantage book, because what the happiness advantage means is, he says, this Acor says, the traditional formula is that you work, put your nose to the grindstone, you achieve success. What's the reward? Happiness. What's the happiness advantage? What research is showing is exactly the opposite. That people who start with happiness, who love what they do and who are just generally happy, have positive emotions, they tend to be much more successful in life and achieve much more. He did massive research on Harvard students and other places as well, in corporations, and he found the same thing across the board. Gita understood that. Dhriti utsaha samanvitaha. Do the work, not blandly, neutrally, unenthusiastically. No, full of enthusiasm, full of perseverance. And yet offer the work itself to God, and then what happens? Magic happens. Because even if you fail, so-called fail, you do your best. Let's say you don't succeed in whatever the task was. You're not devastated by it, because it's up to God. You know that it was never in you did your best, you left the rest. If you succeed, death in your head, but you're happy that you were able to serve God in this way. Do you see? This is the recipe for genuine happiness. That third step is missing from Western positive psychology. Turning karma into karma yoga by analyzing your motives and trying to take the ego out of the work that you're doing as much as possible. The ego, selfishness, work, and offering what you do to the divine. Finally, third, because it's not over yet, but the meaningful life. Martin Seligman says, even the good life is not quite enough. The recipe for authentic, genuine, lasting fulfillment and happiness is combining the good life with what he calls the meaningful life. The meaningful life is, you need to have some higher purpose in your life. And Seligman himself, he's very open about this. He's an atheist, is an atheist. Doesn't believe in God, doesn't consider himself spiritual in that sense. And so he defines this ultimate purpose, this ultimate meaning in a very broad way. And he says, it could be religion, but it need not be. It could be spiritual, need not be. It could be something like environmental activism. It could be fighting for any kind of, any kind of worldly cause. Here again, I think that Vedanta would say, I think you're defining a meaningful life too broadly. Okay? Because what Vedanta will say is that Seligman, positive psychology, is absolutely right in saying that you should lead a good life on a meaningful foundation for a higher purpose that goes beyond just you or just your immediate family or your loved ones. That's true. But the world is like a dog's curly tail. This is one of Swami Vivekananda's most famous statements. The world is like a dog's curly tail. What did he mean by that? Every time you try to straighten out that curly tail, what happens? Brrr, curls up again, right? No matter how much you try, no matter how many Greta Thunbergs there are, the environment will never be perfect. At some point, we're going to have to colonize Mars, probably. Hopefully not in the near future. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to be environmentally conscious. That's not what I'm saying. Please don't put words in my mouth. These causes are great, but that can't be the be-all and end-all in spiritual life and in leading an ultimately happy life. That could be part of a good and meaningful life, but it cannot be the be-all and end-all. The ultimate meaning in life has to be spiritual. It has to be spiritual. That's what Vedanta says. Why? Because everything else is anitya, it's impermanent, it's transient, as Sri Aurobindo would say, no matter what it is, and it'll never ultimately satisfy you. It has to be eternal. that meaning in life, that's what, whether it doesn't have to be God, it doesn't have to be a theistic ideal. Notice, I said spiritual. Buddhism is not about God, but it's spiritual. Advaita Vedanta is not about God, but it's spiritual. So any higher spiritual meaning is enough. So you'll find Gita explaining beautifully. I already talked about the Gita's definition of rajasika happiness. This is the structure of all forms of instant gratification. Now, how does Gita define satvika happiness? Yat tat agre vishamiva pariname mritopamam tat sukham satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadajam. Satvika happiness, satvika joy, is joy that is born of the satisfaction of the higher mind, the buddhi, and the soul, the deeper eternal soul within, the atman. Satvika happiness is like poison in the beginning and like nectar in the end. It has exactly the opposite structure of rajasika happiness, which is like nectar in the beginning and poison in the end. Satvika joy is delayed gratification. Delayed gratification. Exactly what the marshmallow experiment proved and what all of modern neuroscience is proving and positive psychology is proving. Exactly what the Gita is talking about here. And this last phrase in Sanskrit is so beautiful. Atma buddhi prasadajam. Satvika happiness is born, jam, of the prasada, of the satisfaction of two things, buddhi and atma. The higher intelligence in us, not the sense-oriented mind, not the mind that craves instant gratification and those dopamine hits, the dopamine highs, but the higher mind, which cares more about beauty, sublimity, higher things, spiritual things, religious things, God. So what does that mean? Gita is saying instant gratification and satvika happiness are qualitatively different forms of happiness. They're not just quantitatively different. They're not different in degree. They're different in kind. And the deepest explanation that Vedanta gives for why instant gratification will ultimately disappoint us is because it gratifies the body-mind complex. And Vedanta says, all of suffering stems from our mistaken identification with the body-mind complex. So the more we engage in instant gratification, the stronger our identification with the body-mind complex becomes, the more unhappy we'll be. How do we get out of this cycle? We have to break our identification with the body-mind complex. We have to identify with the deeper soul within. How do we do it? Gita tells us. Cultivate sattvika forms of joy. Try to make your life, your daily life, as sattvic as possible. Try to incorporate sattvika forms of happiness and fulfillment throughout your day. And the beauty of texts like the Gita, but also the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, it's a wonderful text in this regard. And we talked about this last year. Sri Ramakrishna gives very, very practical, concrete examples of what is the sattvika bhakta like, what is the rajasika bhakta like, what is the tamasika bhakta like, what is sattvika austerity like, what is sattvika spiritual practice like, what is rajasika spiritual practice like, and so on and so forth. And he gives catalog. Gita does the same thing. And if you look especially at chapters 17 and 18, you'll get this laundry list of different activities that are categorized in terms of the three gunas. And you can apply that directly to your daily life. Worldly, it's not about being a monk or not a monk. How do you make your relationship with your spouse or your partner as sattvic as possible? What's a rajasic relationship? What does that look like? Unhealthy codependence. You're unhealthily dependent on each other. The moment one person leaves even for 6 hours or a day, the other person freaks out. Crying, can't stay, Unhealthy codependence. That's rajasic. How do you make it sattvic? C.S. Lewis, he wrote a book called Four Loves, where he said, he contrasted erotic love with the love of friendship. Erotic love, he says, it's like being face to face. You forget about the rest of the world. The love of friendship is where you're walking side by side. It's a beautiful metaphor. Ideally, even with your romantic partner, you should be trying to walk side by side. That's at least the Hindu, the Vedantic ideal, you see. And then there won't be that clinging and that unhealthy codependence. You make a relationship more sattvic that way. What about your relationship with your children? If you have children, rajasika parenting, it's what Westerners call helicopter parenting. Being overbearing, micromanaging, telling your kid that he has to major in computer science. It's a little dig at my dad. He's calmed down. But he's learned through experience, through kicks and blows. Rajasika parenting. Sattvika parenting, you find out what your parents' strengths are, where they're leaning. You let them grow in their own way. You give them the space to grow in their own way. You encourage them on the path that they feel naturally drawn toward. And what is parenting? Don't be a tamasika parent. Tamasika parenting, do whatever you want. I'm going to go to nightclub. And unfortunately, I've met people like this, poor kids who were raised with parents who were just parents. They just weren't there for their kids. Tamasic. Rajasic is your overbearing micromanaging. Sattvic, you let them grow in their own way. It's a recipe for their own happiness and for your own happiness. Ultimately, parents want their kids to be happy. No parent doesn't want their kid to be happy. Many parents don't know about it. That's the problem. Okay, what about movies? What about music? You can also try to make those activities as sattvic as possible too. Literally everything. What do I mean? Turn on any pop radio, now radio is kind of out, but your favorite three pop music, Billboard Top 10, what are they? They're mostly these pop hits, strong beats. Lyrics tend to be extraordinarily worldly about you broke up with me, oh, I hate you. Or I want to break up with you, I don't like you, you suck. And oh, I love you, why don't you love me? And a million other things. This is what 90% song about. Right? And people can't get enough. But what happens? This is Rajasika music. It taps into the lower mind and it makes us feel good in the moment, but it leaves us unhappier in the end. Sattvika music, take your pick, but often, usually, classical music tends to be on the sattvic side. Not all classical music. Anyone who knows classical music well will know that even within the genre of classical music, there's going to be some Rajasika, some Tamasika classical music will put you straight to sleep. There's some Rajasika classical music which is extremely agitating, and Tchaikovsky, some of his Tchaikovsky stuff. Tchaikovsky went the whole range, and so he's got these incredible spiritual pieces because he was a Russian Orthodox Christian. My favorite is Hymn of the Cherub, if you're interested. But he also has some more Rajasic pieces. But anyways, there's some extraordinarily wonderful sattvic classical music, not only in the West, but of course in India, in other traditions as well. Pandit Jasraj and Bhimsen Joshi, and so many, and wonderful bhajans. All sattvic. Why? Sorry? Tagore songs. Bengalis love their Tagore. Yeah. Rabindra Sangeet. Yes, take your pick. Whatever elevates the mind. And you'll find the lyrics. Look at any Rabindra Sangeet song, Tagore song. It's all about God, really. Worldly people tend to read romance into Tagore, but it's all about God. The romance is with God. That's a misunderstanding of Tagore, actually. So yes, why? So because sattvika forms of happiness, when you listen to sattvika music, when you watch sattvika film, what are sattvika films? Pauthar Panchali, because I'm Bengali, I know some of that. Satyajit Ray is one of the great filmmakers. But in the West, Ingmar Bergman, Andrei Tarkovsky, there are many I can name. Amazing. My favorite contemporary filmmaker, Béla Tarr, a Hungarian filmmaker. He's famous for having made a 7-hour film called Satan Tango. And I loved every second of it. And you might be puzzled by this, but anyway. So I love that kind of film. Challenge yourself. It won't be fun in the beginning, but it's a taste that you cultivate. That's why it's like poison in the beginning. Another example, any kind of spiritual practice. Any kind of spiritual practice. Many of you are initiated. When you first get initiated, what happens? I call it the spiritual honeymoon period. You already have realized God within a few days, or you're on cloud 9 and you're feeling all sorts of things and you think all sorts of things are happening. Wonderful. After 1 or 2 weeks, you come back down to earth. And then what happens? The japa becomes mechanical. And then there's a dry spell for a long time, right? So let's go past the honeymoon period. What happens? Poison. Then the real challenge is to stick with the practice, not to give it up. Persist. If you have doubts, if you have difficulties, go to your guru, talk to your guru about your problems privately. Stick with it. What happens? Ultimately, that practice becomes a source of tremendous joy. And that's a sattvika joy. Because the joy you get from those spiritual practices, it doesn't gratify the body-mind complex, it gratifies the deeper soul within. Every time you get joy from a sattvika practice, you're chipping away at your identification with the body-mind complex and making so much progress toward the ultimate spiritual goal, according to Vedanta, which is realization of your true spiritual nature and realization of the divine. Okay? So, very concretely, what the Gita teaches is, how do you become happy? Number 1, lead the good life. How do you do that? Identify your guna and your karma, what Martin Seligman calls your signature strengths. Number 2, find your swabhava niyatam karma. Find that calling, that line of work, that vocation that helps you to cultivate those signature strengths on a daily basis, on a regular basis. Number 3, analyze the motives behind the work. Be very careful. This is a kind of constant thing. It's not something you do in the beginning and stop at the end. Always ask yourself, what are my real motives for doing this? Is there a secret desire for name and fame behind this, or recognition, blah, blah, blah? Analyze your motives. Try to take as much as possible the ego and selfishness out of that work. Convert karma into karma yoga. And 4th, try to make your daily life as sattvic as possible on a micro level. And the beauty of the Gita gospel is that it helps you to kind of pinpoint. It might be that 90% of your life is very sattvic, and that there's 10%. I've got this smoking habit. I've got this, whatever it is. I've got a weakness for XYZ. I spend too much time on social media. It helps you to pinpoint it. And then you can make these kind of spot corrections, and you can say, wait a minute, then I need to control my social media use. I have to regulate it. One way to do it, by the way, it's a very simple trick, which Anna Lemke talks about. She says, if you yourself are addicted to social media, one great thing to do is restrict your social media use to large devices like iPads or laptops. Because what happens? That means you can't use social media on your phone anymore. It's the phone that's what Anna Lemke calls a 24/7 hypodermic needle. It's literally like a heroin addict having a syringe on him at all times. You know that. Bung, or whatever your ping, you set the ping notification, whatever sound it is. The moment you hear that, you get that dopamine rush. And your kid or you can't resist. It doesn't matter if it's a satsanga discourse. Several of you might have even looked at your phone since the start of this talk. You can't help yourself. You're like those rats. I am too. So you see, try to make whatever you're doing in your daily life as sattvic as possible. Those 2 things, remember that. Leading the good life by identifying your signature strengths, finding a line of work that helps you to cultivate those strengths, converting work into karma yoga, make your life as sattvic as possible. This will be and have an overarching spiritual meaning to your life. That's also fundamental. If you have all these elements, you will lead a happy life. Thank you. Do I do the mantra now or do a quick Q&A? Every center is different. Should I do a closing mantra and then we do Q&A? Key. Let's do Q&A first. That makes more sense. Let's do it. Yeah. Remind me of your name, everyone, because I'm terrible with names.
My name is excellent. By the way, now there's a new name for helicopter apparently.
Oh.
Snowplow apparently. Not only below, actually move obstacles out. So.
Oh, interesting. No, but or is it that you plow over your kid? What's the idea?
My question was the third point, converting into
karma into karma yoga. Yeah.
Really struck a chord. And to me, one of the most driven, successful persons who talked about stay hungry, stay foolish is Steve Jobs. And was he missing this karma yoga?
I think so. If you look at him, he had everything except happiness, I felt like. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
The karma yoga and how, because he talks about stay hungry, stay foolish in his final speech at actually Stanford.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe this is the angle, the karma, the thinking about. So the question is that the missing piece?
That could be one of them. The thing is, to his credit, he did go on pilgrimage in India at one point early on, and yeah, and he was exploring and he was open, but at some point I think that he became sort of, yeah, there's definitely an ego drive there, there's a tremendous ambition, and many people will say that's how he succeeded. You can't succeed without it. Gita says no. Gita says no. It says you can take the ego out of the work and be as successful, if not more successful. Yeah, thank you. More than that, yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's probably, scholars dated around 200-ish CE, but who knows, yeah. Yeah.
That is one. And the other thing is the name of the talk, the science religion.
Happiness.
That's a kind of happiness. Instead of science, science is I'm not saying replace science with art,
Mm.
art of happiness.
Mm.
Instead of that, if you say art and science of happiness, I think that would
Mm.
be more appropriate.
That's a nice suggestion. I mean, one thing though, what I'd suggest is, I think you're defining science too narrowly. Science need not take place in a laboratory. In fact, if you look at Raja Yoga, how many of you have read Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga? If you look at the very beginning, the preface, I was teaching it, so you can look at it if you're, this class 1 on Raja Yoga. It's very interesting. His whole argument is religion is just as much of a science as physics or chemistry or mathematics. Why? Because the essence of any science is that its claims can be empirically verified. And he says, on that criterion, religion is just as much of a science as any of your natural sciences. And in that sense, there's a science of happiness. That's why the term, I chose it very carefully. First of all, because neuroscience is, of course, science. Psychology is another form of social science, right? And these are scientific studies, many of which are conducted in laboratories. That's one aspect of the science of happiness. But what the Gita is teaching, equally scientific. Why? Because what I just said about Rajasika happiness, Sattvika happiness, can't it be verified in every single one of our lives? Do it. Engage in instant gratification. We're already doing it anyway with social media and 100 other things. Is it making us happy? No. Verified. You see? So in that sense, every claim I've made in this talk is a verifiable claim and therefore a scientific claim. Thank you. At the same time, I like the idea of art, and the art element is nice because what that brings in is there's a certain grace and skill involved in leading a happy life. And it's one in which you also, you learn how to navigate this world and this life gracefully. And I think that's a nice element of this art. That adds something that I think is, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Niles.
So nice to see you again.
Yeah, likewise.
As you may remember, I'm an addiction scientist,
Mm.
behavior scientist,
Mm.
and I work in
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking for a while, maybe you and I have corresponded on this
Mm.
before, about, I've been thinking about how do I bring Vedanta into our work, or how do I bring 12-step or other approaches for sobriety, getting sober to Vedanta. So I wonder, that's a big topic. So I'm curious, are you aware of any places where the order is doing some type of outreach or communication, or community building surrounding physical addiction or drug addiction? Or are you aware of where that maybe philosophical correspondences or
Yeah.
developments of these ideas are
Sure, sure. No, that's a great question. Look, on the practical side, I think that it gets tricky in the West, especially in the US, because there's so many regulations around these things. So even if a monk has a bleeding heart and wants to help drug addicts, they can't just run off to an addiction clinic and say, I'm going to help you. You need the proper credentials like you have. And so it's a little tricky, but you're exactly the kind of person that we should consult to figure out what we can do. And I think that's something that I think, I think some people wrongly think that in the West, that in India there's a need for social service and to help the poor and the needy. In the West, no, everybody's rich. It's just patently false. We have homeless people sleeping in our temple, and so it's a terrible situation. And there's a crying need for that kind of social service. And so I think that's a great question. But the other side of it is, on the philosophical side, maybe I can help you a little bit more. And because we don't have much time, let me just give one statement that I think is really powerful. Swami Medhananda, he says, the secret of life is not enjoyment, but education through experience. I think that's very powerful. I'm a Hindu chaplain at 2 universities, at USC and UCLA, and I bust it out in almost every class because it's so relevant to everybody in every age group. Because it's not preachy. See, the beauty of Vedanta is not telling you do this and don't do that. You should feel ashamed of yourself for having done this. It's not about that. It's about do it, but do it mindfully. And ask yourself whether you got out of the experience what you were looking for. That's what Vedanta teaches. Thank you. Yeah. Namaskar.
All excellent talk.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed your talk. It's just more of a comment or maybe a question. Like you mentioned about subject pleasures, Vishya,
Sense pleasures, but yeah. Instant gratification.
instant gratification. I think
Mm.
we talk the word when in Indian system, we are programmed to, say, study hard, to
Mm.
make good grades, to get good job, to enjoy the pleasures of life,
Yeah.
and recreation.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. The happiness advantage. The whole thing is actually the wrong way around. That's what Acor says. Yeah. Yeah.
we start sipping the nectar.
Yeah.
And my comment here is that you ultimately will have to taste the poison, which we do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then we hit the rock bottom,
Yeah.
and then we start going back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you like to share sometimes
But when I hit rock bottom, I don't know. No, but let me supplement what you said with another beautiful statement of Swami Vivekananda's. It's not a pleasant one, but it's an important and profound one. He says, suffering is the great eye-opener. Suffering, every single one of you in the room knows this, I'm sure. Often we learn more from suffering than from our joys and our pleasures. This is just a hard fact of life. First chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, every chapter has a title. What's the title of the first chapter? Does anyone know? Arjuna Vishada Yoga. This is wonderful. The Gita is inventing a new yoga. What's the yoga? The yoga of suffering. The yoga of Arjuna's dejection, depression, suffering, misery. Look at how much Arjuna learns through his suffering. He ultimately has God realization through it. That's the beauty of it. The turning point in his life was this terrible crisis. When he's faced with this terrible conflict, when he's forced to kill his loved ones, his gurus. And that was a spiritual turning point in his life. That's what ultimately led to God realization. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Your name?
My name is Param. I'm new to the congregation.
Welcome.
Came to Houston 3 weeks ago. So I certainly appreciated everything that
Thank you.
in terms of, I'm kind of searching for balance. Like, obviously, we can't be in this state of flow 24 hours
No,
a day.
no.
Okay, so now this can't
Yeah.
be. We can't even be in that for 16 hours a day. And if you let go the baser elements
Mm.
of the treasury of your life,
Yeah.
work or whatever,
Yeah.
taking care of your finances or
Correct.
so that,
Hmm.
those are not exactly sattvic stuff.
What? The 9-to-5 job and
Finances or taking
well,
groceries
okay.
or-
Remind me to bring that up, but yeah, it could be. I want to say it could be, but anyway, keep going. Yeah.
So my question is it's like they say, for instant gratification, too much of a good thing.
Hmm.
Is there something along the lines of too much of a good thing even in this flow state, which should alert you to kind of correct the balance and
Hmm.
don't get on the wrong side of your
That's an interesting question. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's why we need the essential third step in leading the good life. Make sure that the work you're doing is karma yoga, because if it's not karma yoga, what happens? You get attached to the work. As a result of that attachment, you become addicted to the work. There's some people who are work addicts. We don't need to point fingers. They might be ourselves, right? But that's a recipe for unhappiness again. And that's that lack of balance, do you see? But if you can turn your work into karma yoga, simple things, give you some concrete tips. Before you start your day, chant a mantra like we just did. What is the idea? Oh Lord, oh divine, please accept this as an offering, as a humble offering to you. In the middle of your work, not constantly because it may not be practical, sometimes check in with God again, check in with the divine. Ask yourself, am I doing this for myself, for name and fame, or for the divine? At the end of the work, making an offering to the divine. I've done my best, O Lord. Please forgive me for any mistakes I made. Success and failure is in your hands. Siddhi siddho nirvikaraha. You are unaffected by success or failure because you know that it's up to God, it's not up to you. So that's an important part of it. Secondly, why did I emphasize also trying to make every aspect of your life, every waking moment as sattvic as possible? That's another way to bring balance in your life. Life isn't just about work and your calling, your vocation. It's 24 hours a day, including your sleep. Make everything in your life as sattvic as possible. In that way, what happens? Your baseline level of joy is going to be way higher. That's what's crucial about, if your life is basically sattvic, you're going to find that sattvic people, they just tend to be content with very little. That's a kind of almost definitionally, you'll find. The most sattvika people, Sri Ramakrishna talks about it. He says, what's a sattvika? Like a worldly person living in the world. He's not necessarily even a spiritual aspirant, but who's very sattvic. You go to their house, it's not very neat and clean. There are cobwebs in the corners of the rooms. You go to the shrine, they're very devoted, so there's a shrine, but they're not cleaning it properly. They're bird droppings. He's very graphic in describing it. But the person is incredibly giving, selfless, compassionate, innately devotional and spiritual. You see, it doesn't need much of anything to be happy. That's the sattvika person. The rajasika person, he says, somebody who has a picture, this is in the time of colonial India, right? He has a huge photo of Queen Victoria on the wall. He has pictures of rich people. Everything is spick and span, which is not to say you should be messy or dirty, but he's making a very profound psychological point here. There's no outward show in sattvika people. Rajasika people, all about outward show. They want to impress people. They want to make sure people know they're very spiritual or very wealthy. Sattvika people don't care in the least because they know it's a relationship between them and God. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, your name, please?
Swamiji, my name is Rahul.
Namaste.
I'm glad you're here again. My question is, if you look at the society nowadays, the tendency is people to focus mainly on their health, use the mental activity for the livelihood. Body using the karma, physical organs, they're getting away more and more towards the mental activity. The karma focuses more and more on mental activity. Eventually, it is all like meditation. More the meditation, more resolution happens on the mind. Body after mind becomes, less very active, but eventually it absorbs. The third level is spiritual level. The whole society of the world is moving towards the spiritual aspect because of the emphasis on the mental activity and mental work.
I see. Okay, that's an interesting idea. I mean, one thing I'll just... okay, yeah, what's the question? Yeah, tell me that. Yeah.
Because of the intensity, as Vedanta says, Bhagavad Gita, as a person's mind dissolves to spirituality, the person leads to the true nature himself. What is true nature? Sat, Chit, Ananda. That itself is happiness. The nature of every person in the whole society or the whole world will lead eventually to the perpetual bliss and happiness. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I just want to complicate it or nuance it a little bit. I think what you were suggesting is that work has become more mental rather than physical, and that's a sign of progress toward the spiritual, as far as I understand what you're saying. Here's one thing I'll say, is that I think, practically speaking, often you'll find it easier to think about the divine doing physical work than doing mental work. Why? Because once the mind is preoccupied with your finances, somebody was mentioning finances, I think it was you. What happens? Can't think of God mentally. But that's why, see, Sri Ramakrishna will sometimes, he'll give examples of physical labor. Why? Because I used to, in Billiman, I'm an expert fruit cutter because I cut fruit every day for, I don't know how many years, the whole time I was a brahmachari, for 10 years almost. Because of that, the whole time you're cutting fruit, you can be doing japa. Can you be doing mental japa at the same time that you're doing mental labor? It's much more difficult. You can do it, but it's a very high level practice. That becomes ajapa japa because the mantra has become so ingrained in you that it sinks into the unconscious level. And so at the conscious level, you're doing your mental work, and at the unconscious level, the name of the divine is being repeated. But that's a high level achievement. So I just want to complicate what you're saying a little bit and say that in some respects, physical labor and physical work is a wonderful opportunity for spiritual practice and for karma yoga. I don't want to get into the game of saying that mental labor is somehow higher or better or more spiritual than physical labor. I don't think that's true. But the rest of your comment I think is good. Sri Aurobindo's entire philosophy is based on the idea of evolution's not over. We've evolved from the level of matter to the level of life to the level of mind. Now we're at mind. But that beyond mind is the overmind and ultimately supermind. And that at some point, life itself will become divine. And I think that's absolutely true. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, everyone will be fed. Some people at 6 in the morning, others at noon, others at 6 p.m., others at midnight. But nobody will be left out. Everybody will be fed. So I fully agree with you on that point. And that should give us great hope. And we should never get discouraged in spiritual life. And remember also, this is not our only life. We have many, many lifetimes. That's really what Sri Ramakrishna meant when he said midnight or 6 p.m. It means we're not getting liberation in this life, but eventually we will. Even the Hitlers of the world. Just imagine. They won't be Hitler anymore when they get liberation. They'll become saints. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Very thoughtful questions. And thank you for having me. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna